All right, thank you. Thank you also very much for coming. Hope you had a good lunch and a chance to chat and meet some new people. I always love the lunch break for that. This is the future of publishing, a university's view. I was told that there might have been an error on one of the signs out front, but if that's what you're here for, you're in the right place. And I think we've got just an amazing panel here for you to hear from. And I will basically just let you know who they are, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit more about their backgrounds. And I have prepared a couple of big picture questions that I sent them ahead of time. They've got a couple of ideas, so we'll run through a couple of those, and then my hope was to open up a large portion of this time to your questions, and if there's other sort of discussions that come out of the answers that they give initially. So definitely be thinking and jotting things down. I would love to hear what's on your mind. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists to you. We have Dr. Jeffrey Vitter from University of Kansas. He's the provost and executive vice chancellor there. We have Dr. Paul Courant, who is from the University of Michigan. He's currently a professor in a number of areas, public policy, information. He's also served as provost and university librarian. And we have Geneva Henry from George Washington University, just a few metro stops away. And she is the university librarian and vice provost for libraries there. So at this point, I'll just maybe let you guys give a brief introduction, and then we'll continue. Would you like to go first?
Okay, sure. Thanks, Ben. So I'm Geneva Henry, and I guess I was told to give you just a brief background of who I am. So there are a number of places I can start. I'll start with, academically where I started out. I started in political science, and after my bachelor's degree, worked as a business analyst for a couple of years. Then I knew what I didn't want to do. So I went back to grad school in political science and was working on my doctorate. And somewhere along the line, I started doing programming and decided I wanted to take a leave of absence from that. And I went and got a computer science degree. Never looked back. Went to work in industry, working in artificial intelligence, doing some very fun, interesting applied research projects. And that was in California, then moved to Houston, where I went to work for IBM, working on International Space Station program, and then did that for a while, and through some changes that happened, I learned about politics and government contracts, and ended up shifting back into more search-related activities, getting more into digital libraries, which was what IBM was one of the areas they were starting to migrate into. So I worked with a number of research universities wanting to start up digital library programs to architect solutions for them. Worked for on a large DoD project for radiology imaging system for a group of Army hospitals. Then was recruited to Rice University to start their digital library initiative. So I went there in 2000, and in 2013 was recruited to George Washington University to be their vice provost for libraries. So that's my background.
Thank you very much. Paul?
Thanks, Ben. My name's Paul Courant, as has been said. And I'm going to just briefly describe the rather unusual career path because it's kind of relevant to what we're going to be talking about. I'm now a college professor, which is an extremely nice line of work. I recommend it to you. But I used to be a provost, and then I was University librarian and dean of libraries. Notice the progression, right? First provost, and then up to a real job. And I was head of the Ford School of Public Policy and chair of the economics department and a variety of other things. I know of one other economist who became a library dean in a university in Japan. I forget his name. And I know of one other provost who became a university librarian, Jim O'Donnell, who's the university librarian at Arizona State, having been provost at Georgetown. But I am, as I said, now just a college professor. I was a history major as an undergraduate. And back in the days when someone who had a BA in history could actually get a PhD in economics, right? Which implies, for those of you who've been in the business any amount of time, I'm really old, because that's been an impossible move for a very long time. I got into libraries by being provost. When I was provost, we negotiated, well, two things when I was provost. When I was provost, I suddenly noticed that we were spending $50-odd million a year on the library. I thought, that's a lot of money to be spending on something. I wonder if that's are we getting our money's worth? Yes, of course. The other is we got involved in the Google project, the Google scanning project. Michigan was actually the first place that Google started to do the mass digitization of library collections. And I was involved in negotiating that deal and lots of things that came from it when I was provost. And so when I stopped being provost and went back to being a college professor for the first time, my successor said, when the librarian job opened up, gee, you should be interested in that. You know a lot about it. You've got this connection. And I was interested. So I became librarian, having been interested in the library because I was provost. And here I want to make just a brief comment about the way I think about the library and the university, because I'm going to go back and forth in our remarks here between the provost's eye view and the librarian's eye view, which I think ought to be consonant. But during my time as university librarian, I occasionally annoyed some of my librarian colleagues by arguing that the librarian's job is to see that the library serves the university, which may or may not align with the health, reputation, and prosperity of the library. And at some margin, actually, they can't be perfectly aligned, right? A university that had the richest library in the world but nothing else wouldn't be much of a university. And a university that had the richest everything else in the world but not much of a library actually couldn't have the richest everything else in the world because it wouldn't work right without a good library. There's a margin in there always where the provost is trying to figure out which of the many dozens, hundreds of valuable things the university is doing should get a little more at the cost of which getting a little less. And the deans perceive what the provost is up to, but perceive what they're up to in part is competing for the university's resources. What the provost is actually up to is trying to optimize the allocation of those resources in a synergistic way across the various activities. And this applies to the library and everything else. And at the heart of those activities for research universities is research itself, which, and I'm now getting back to the topic of this discussion, which requires publication in order to actually be useful research. So the organizing question of this panel, which is the university's view of scholarly publishing, is extremely appealing because what we're trying to figure out here is in the research university, how best to serve the research interests of the university via scholarly publishing, which is an essential part.
Thank you, Paul.
Great. My name is Jeff Vitter. I am a provost at the University of Kansas. And I really got started in the scholarly publishing field in a sense because my thesis advisor at Stanford, Don Knuth, is the inventor of TeX and the Metafont and all these typesetting and type font design systems. In fact, I was his last student not to do things related to tech. I was purely in computer science analysis of algorithms. But I got very interested in the whole process. And lo and behold, after really a career in big data, that's my main field in computer science, which is how to store, access, and organize data for efficient access, especially when it's so massive that it must be stored on secondary, tertiary devices and/or in compressed format, where communication is really the bottleneck in many cases. So with that background, computer science really being about problem solving, I became more interested in administration and became department chair, got my MBA along the way, and then became dean and now provost. And at KU, where I am provost, we're especially interested in all the intersection of all these areas of big data. We have a very active repository, KU ScholarWorks. KU is the first public university that has an open access policy, so we're very proud of that, and it's a big effort on campus that is driving a lot of activities that really, as Paul said, exploit the synergies of what the libraries can do for the academic community and the scholarly world. And that's an exciting world to live in, and I look forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you all for that introduction. So Paul did bring it up, and Jeff as well, that the goal of this, I think, was to create a dialogue. We have the foremost meeting of the publishing industry here, and then bringing a few viewpoints from university administration and library administration where we can have that sort of conversation. So with that in mind, I had sent them a list of 3 questions ahead of time that I told them they could sort of stew on and come up with just a brief answer for. And I'll go through those right now. The first was, I asked them, tell us about any programs at your institution that relate to scholarly publishing. Does your library or the university press publish journals? And are there other programs in place that support researchers as they try to publish their work? I guess we can start again with Geneva, if you want.
Start with me?
Sure.
Okay. See if the slides work. Okay. So where we are at GW, we do not have a university press. However, we have a lot of faculty, a lot of students, especially grad students, who are very interested in publishing their own journals. So what's happening around the campus right now is pretty much they look around and they end up coming to one of our librarians, awesome librarians, who then will point them to Open Journal System and sort of say, well, here's a platform, and give them, sort of a basic grounding and set them on their way. But then somewhere along the way, the resources sort of shrink. They just aren't there to get everybody all the way along. And people end up at different points along the path. They need things like planning. They need things like nudging to say, how you doing on that? Is there something I can help? They need help with copy editing. They need help with layout. And we just don't have the support to be able to offer that to them. So what we have seen with our faculty and our students who want to do this is very few make it to the end. They get stuck somewhere along the way, and things tend to wither, which is very frustrating for us because we have librarians who care deeply about this. But with all of the demands that are there and not having a university press, it's difficult to go out and fully support them in those endeavors. So what we are able to do is we offer them support via workshops, panels, information systems, trying to address some of the critical issues that they get stuck with. Copyright, of course, the many variants of copyright that are possible, what it means for them in publishing, issues around cross-disciplinary publishing, how to get started. We've got faculty, young faculty, like, how do I start? And it might sound like a strange question, but it's a question of, where do I get started and get going? So just helping them along with that. Talking about the trends of what's possible to do in publishing outside of traditional journals, because this is where we see frustration with our faculty. They have ideas. They want to present their knowledge in some way that text doesn't accommodate very well, or at least text alone is not very accommodating. They're looking for other people who can help them out as well. So a lot of what the library can also do is build community. Some of these issues, more and more, probably if you're at a university, you're seeing this as well. Cross-disciplinary collaboration is a big emphasis now. Everyone's getting into it. Everyone's moving out on programs. It is interesting, But when they go to publish, there are real challenges there. They submit their works to journal, and the journal doesn't have anybody who can peer review that full scope. They are very focused. So trying to build a community to work through some of these issues that they're facing right now that we're setting as universities as priorities, yet we've put a real roadblock there when we're relying on those traditional publications for promotion and tenure consideration, and it takes years before they actually can get it through because they keep getting rejected by the disciplinary journals that make up the cross-disciplinary work that they're working on. Looking at the larger scope of data management and what it means to publish data sets, again, the libraries are working not only with the faculty on this, but this is an issue, and I'm sure, Jeffrey, having this as his background, can speak quite well to this, but it's an issue that requires more parts of the campus than one single area can get hold of. And this has an impact then on publishing, because publishers, if they think that they're going to be able to manage publishing of data sets, it's a lot more complex. So pulling together, libraries, the IT organizations, compliance organizations, the sponsored research groups, it's critical to get everybody working together as a team, and then thinking about how do these data sets get published so that they can be managed, so that the information gets out there, funders are happy with it, and it's a win-win for everybody involved. And the bottom line on all of this, what I will say is that in all of this, trying to help faculty with their publications and support what they're trying to do really comes down to the priorities. And the leadership can make that decision. Even though faculty want to do things, if the leadership isn't setting this as a priority and funding it as a priority, putting the resources behind it, both the money and the people resources that need to be there to make it happen, it's not going to happen. So, leadership is key in all of this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Paul, your thoughts?
So the question is, what kind of programs do we have that relate to scholarly publishing? I would again assert that with the exception, I was going to say the exception of intercollegiate athletics, but even that wouldn't be a proper exception. Mm-hmm. Everything we do relates to scholarly publishing, right? If it doesn't show up somehow in the sort of grand conversation that is scholarship, which requires being made public, then why are we doing it? And that's true in a research university, but that's actually also true in a liberal arts college, just the proportions are different. So there's that. But sort of in terms of more formal programs, we have both programs and unprograms. So let me describe the unprogrammed first. At a place like Michigan, which has over 100 departments, centers, institutes, and such, it turns out there are dozens of publishing operations sitting in various places, not under the very watchful eye of the provost, although the provost occasionally says, why are we doing all these things? But we're doing it because serious faculty are engaged in it, and good universities don't stop serious faculty from being engaged in the things they want to be engaged in. There is an effort on campus, increasingly so, for the office that sits in the library. It used to be called the Scholarly Publishing Office. It's now called Michigan Publishing. It now also includes the press, to give support to various of these kinds of operations. And some deans and some chairs begin to steer these relatively small operations towards that in the hope of affecting some efficiencies and economies, also in the hope of being able to produce better. Stay tuned, because I actually can't imagine an environment in which even after, the day after we have it completely cleaned up and rationalized, somebody, right, in the Romance Languages Department is going to decide, we need a little journal of our own. And that will happen. It doesn't have to be Romance Languages, it could be anywhere. The library, the library publishes journals, this is very odd, and the press doesn't. Is that right, Jason? We don't publish any in the press. Okay, good. The library publishes quite a few journals. Some of them fairly eminent. Philosopher's Imprint is the most, perhaps the best known one, and counts as a sort of major journal in philosophy. Many smaller ones on a shoestring, or various kinds of shoestrings. Whereas there are presses that publish journals and actually are profitable, and we know that there are some journals that are profitable, Be Still My Heart. The journals at the University of Michigan are not. It's much more of a sort of gift economy where the journal operation provides support, again, to faculty at Michigan or elsewhere to produce typically open access journals with some support, but actually not making much money, not making any money generally at the fare box. And there are also programs to support researchers as they publish their work, which is something that Ben asked about. We have a system of subventions, both in the Arts and Sciences College and at the level of the Vice President for Research, to support unusual costs in book publishing. And unusual costs in book publishing are actually pretty usual. They're not most of the time, but they're much of the time. So expensive permissions, art is actually a continuing problem, images, and we'll actually get into some of the more difficulties in that area a little later, perhaps. But so there's help there. We do not generally provide support for article processing charges because it's hopeless, right? I mean, make a big budget, $500,000, right? And you still don't get very many of the ones that are coming your way, and nobody's going to want to spend anything like that kind of money on it. So that economy is going to have to change, I think, in some ways. We'll see if the granting agencies continue to be available to produce to that. I'm now off topic. I can't resist. This happens to me all the time. But in the humanities especially humanists who publish in Europe and who've been doing so forever suddenly are informed, oh, by the way, we can make your article in classics open access for only 4,000 euros. They say, what? 4,000 euros is 2/3 of the flexible money I get this decade. It doesn't add up, but that isn't where I was trying to go. So we support publication. Obviously, we stress the importance of publication as an essential part of a research career. And we do have good institutional setup. We have a good copyright office. We give good advice to faculty who are interested in publishing problems. We're able to use the Michigan Publishing. People come to Michigan Publishing more and more and say, I want to be publishing in this area. It's a new area. How do I start a journal? How do I find out who's working in this area? Being able to deliver that kind of service to faculty, I think, is very important.
At the University of Kansas, interest in scholarly publishing really picked up steam in the late 1990s. David Schulenberger, then provost, had a real passion for open access, so our repository, KU ScholarWorks, debuted in 2003, and then 5 years later, in 2008, we passed our open access policy. Did I mention that KU, by the way, is the first public institution in the U.S. With an open access policy? I'll probably say that another couple of times.
I have to jump in here and say I'm always telling our faculty if we really had our act together, we'd be half as good at Kansas as
Very
Kansas,
good.
And they love hearing that.
Yeah. Right. So we're going to tag team on that point. And actually, we passed a second policy the next year with a more detailed implementation focus. And the three key elements of the policy are first that faculty automatically grant a non-exclusive license to the university to share a copy of their papers, and that faculty will give a copy of their papers to the library, and faculty have the right to opt out of that if they want to not put something in the public domain. Now, another aspect of university culture is that we don't enforce things very strongly, so we've been also working on ways to encourage faculty to just naturally do this. And one of the exciting things now is, well, first of all, I would say before the policy went into effect, so this was 7 years ago, There were only about less than 1 out of 6 faculty who had publications in KU ScholarWorks. Now it's the majority of faculty, but we also have in place now something called PRO, which stands for Professional Records Online, which is all of the professional curriculum vitae type records, publications that are used for promotion and tenure and general annual reviews are now using this particular system, and that feeds automatically to the libraries so that we have a semi-automatic way of entering articles and publications into KU ScholarWorks. So that's going to, I think, since we just implemented PRO, that will start very much ramping up the number of publications and the percentage of faculty who are in KU ScholarWorks. And one of the really exciting things to me about PRO is that it also feeds into a faculty expertise database that we're going to launch this summer that is really kind of cool because you can type an arbitrary term, and on the left side you'll see all the faculty members that have expertise according to that term in some kind of ranked order, and then on the right you see a word cloud of all of the faculty's work that are listed on the left side, and you can click on a term in the word cloud and that shifts the order of the faculty, and it realigns based on that term, and it gives you the, if you click on a faculty member, it gives you the publications, the grants, and access to the web page. So that's, I think, more and more connecting scholarly publishing and research to help make connections so that our researchers can do projects with corporations or other researchers around the country, or even at KU itself. We also have, as Paul mentioned, an open access fund to help faculty members who want to deal with article processing charges to make their publications accessible. And we're involved in an open educational resource textbook project to provide materials so that our faculty can build and publish textbooks using really a rich set of resources that are available freely across the country, and providing them easy access to that, I think, is very helpful to encourage that sort of activity, which greatly reduces the cost to students for textbooks. We do host a variety of publications. KU Libraries has been active in providing support to the KU community for the publication of journals, conference proceedings, monographs. So that service launched 8 years ago. We currently support 17 publications, and these vary from online publications of normal print publications, so online versions of traditional publications, to totally new open access only journals, as well as online subscription journals that have various embargo periods. We also provide digital object IDs and ensure permanent preservation and archiving with a third-party service. And we do consulting activity to help faculty members start new journals or publications, and we provide consulting on issues such as working with database aggregators such as Project Muse. And one of the things we're doing as well is hosting an editors forum that brings the community together of faculty as well as representatives from, for example, Allen Press, one of the sponsors here, is very, very active and progressive and does a lot of coordinated work with KU. And we also host University Press of Kansas, which is part of the Regent system, so it's not just for KU, but it serves all of the public universities in Kansas. And there are various collaborative projects with them, and this editors forum brings all of those folks together on a regular basis for discussion so that we can continue these collaborations.
All right, thank you so much. I think that just gives us a good overview of the kind of focus that the universities have in terms of how they relate to what we might traditionally think of as scholarly publishing. And Paul, you're right. I think that ultimately, if you're doing research, then you're part of that process. So being that this is from the track of the future of scholarly publishing, the next question that I posed to them was, how do you envision the future of scholarly publishing in 10 or 15 years? In particular, maybe what one major difference do you see, and what do you see being the same? So, would you like to go ahead and start, sure?
Okay, so what are we looking at in the future? Data, interactivity, it's all there, and it has to be. It's part of the scholarly article. So I think we're going to see a lot more visualizations, a lot more interactivity with the presentation of the scholarly work, because that's what's going to allow scholars to really drill in, verify the findings that are being presented, really understand much more about it, share not only the knowledge that's disseminated via the text, but the actual data underlying it, the data sets that are there. So I do think that that will happen. I think we'll also be seeing many more models along the lines of the archived preprint repository. I think we're going to see more and more disciplines move in that direction, where they're actually going to a repository of preprints for their area and citing those before the article actually goes through the full publication process, if the timeline is still going to take the time that it currently takes. And I think that we're going to see a lot more publication happening outside of the traditional journals if the publishers cannot move at sufficient speed to accommodate alternative forms of publications. Faculty researchers are not going to wait. They need to get their knowledge out there in the way they need to present it. And more they're finding that text alone is just not going to do it. So that's sort of, some of the highlights I see for, 10 to 15 years into the future. What will be new? What's the same? Art. I really do think that art is one of those areas, and this is where I tell my librarians all the time, if you want to understand what's going to happen 10 years into the future, just go observe your current students, because they're the ones who are going to be that 10 to 15 years into the future. And it's very interesting looking at art students, working with art students, because they are so print dependent, and they love their print. I had been told that, and I didn't fully believe it. They love their print. So I don't know that that is going to change too much in the future. They like print. The other thing I don't think is going to change in 10 to 15 years, I hope it does, but I think it won't change. Journals will still be very expensive, and faculty will still complain that we don't have what they want.
Okay, Paul, yeah. What are your thoughts, Paul?
So several years ago, when I was university librarian, the provost was having one of those provost moods when he was asking the deans, so what's the world going to look like 10 or 15 years from now? Provost liked to ask questions. And so in particular, what's the future of the library look like? And my answer to him was, tell me what's going to happen to scholarly publishing, and I'll tell you what's going to happen to the library. Without some theory of what happens to publishing, scholarly publishing, I don't know what's going to happen to the library. We'll probably still have a lot of books there. But scholarly publishing is going to drive how the library behaves around a great many things: archiving, distribution, how much space we need, all kinds of stuff. So that was true then, and I think that's true now. The problem is we try to figure out what's going to happen, how to make the scholarly communication business thrive, is that, of course, and we all know this, the technical ability to copy and distribute is now itself almost universally distributed. It used to be closely held. And almost all of the institutions of publishing are built on a world where the ability to copy and distribute was closely held. And there was a lot of competition around that, and totally rightly so. In the digital world, any kid with a PC, and in fact, kids especially, because they're not especially good respecters of law, Any kid with a PC can distribute any amount of stuff almost anywhere at trivial marginal cost to him or herself. And so that's going to change, continue to change things a lot, including because there's a norm that says if you want it, so Geneva said the faculty will still say, we don't have enough stuff. There's also a norm that increasingly grows up which says if I know what it is and I want it, I can get it. And I ought to be able to get it. And if you don't deliver it to me, you have a problem. I don't have a problem, you have a problem. And I think that gets stronger and stronger and stronger over time. And so developing institutions that are market consistent, that admit of this ability to be able to draw upon much more scholarly work from more places, more people with great ease, is the puzzle of the next 10 or 15 years. And I think more and more that the right way to deal with that is going to be a mechanism of paying publishers to do a good job publishing and then making the works available, open access. Now that's a very, there's lots of people have written and said lots of things about that, and I certainly don't have a well-worked out model in my head, but that's one set of things where I think that is going to be the direction, whether we want to or not, because people are not going to tolerate very high paywalls for very many things. And when I say people, I don't mean university librarians, who are by and large law-abiding citizens, but I do mean faculty and students who are by and large citizens. And so the other thing that we don't really know how it's going to play out, which I think is very interesting, is there are many digital affordances to be able to do kinds of work, big data being among them, but also interesting visualization, having things that are interactive, that having scholarly works that don't stay put, for which there's no final version, right? There's going to be more and more of that too. And the Academy is going to struggle to figure out how to judge that work, how to support that work, and how to hold on to that work, which can be very expensive. And I think many of us are working on those issues. What is absolutely going to stay the same is that peer review will be the coin of the realm of the scholarly enterprise. Now, whether that's pre-publication peer review, I think actually less and less, or whether that's peer review of things that are in various ways made public, which I think will be more and more, remains to be seen. I remember actually having this conversation with Dave Schulenberger 15 years ago. We thought this is just around the corner, the separation of publishing and peer review. Well, it's been a long corner, and so I may be wrong about this. But I do think that peer review in some form is what we do. It's the only way that scholarship can be appropriately judged. One more little piece. I think that the ability to make scholarly works more easily available to the world is part of the solution to the problem: how do universities persuade their benefactors around the world, their tuition payers and grantors and everybody else, that what we do is really of real value, right? There have been many attacks on the university and its value, and I think publishing well, publishing broadly, publishing so that access is open or very inexpensive is part of those sets of solutions.
Thank you.
Actually, what Paul was talking about at one point in terms of new models for publishing is something that we've been engaging with the AU and ARL about potential subventions to help authors provide, in some sense, the costs of publishing manuscripts to help save what is continuing to be a problem with university presses around the country. And one of the main points, too, is that we simply don't know how the scholarly publishing world will evolve. It is changing, but we don't really quite know where it's going to end up. One of the things that I think definitely will happen is because of the federal mandate, for example, and legislation such as FASTER and proposed approaches like the SHARE approach that APLU and ARL are proposing, is that there will be more and more integration of institutional repositories linked together to service a broadening network of scholarly publications. And especially not just the publications themselves, but the underlying data, which is a much bigger problem. Making that sort of data available, those data are just much harder to deal with and to categorize, to make accessible and usable so that people can actually access and perhaps redo experiments and use data in new ways. That's going to be a huge challenge because of the magnitude of it, and the federal government is trying to figure out how to deal with that federal mandate. So curating research data will become very, very important. We're involved in a number of partnerships, so I would hope that those partnerships are going to expand over the coming years. Certainly within institutions, we're going to see closer links between libraries and presses, but even across institutions, for example, the Open Access Network that we're an inaugural sponsor of, brings together scholarly societies, academic libraries, and publishers to share approaches, develop new models, and that potentially could lead or help bring about some of the new, perhaps, models that will be able to be sustained going forward. We're going through a lot of pilot projects to kind of test out different approaches and see where they go. We are digitizing backlists of a number of monographs in conjunction with our university press, so that's a productive partnership going on. We have a print-on-demand pilot project with our bookstore, and we work with Allen Press very closely. I mentioned them a little earlier. They're a press in Lawrence, Kansas, and we work together so that we make use of each other's expertise. In particular, they do excellent jobs of copy editing and production work, and we can handle a lot of the dissemination and archiving of the actual publication. So I think we really don't know how things are going to go, but more and more we have to make materials available online and take advantage of the collective capabilities of all of our institutions to provide an integrated framework that people can actually access and find information.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you all. I hadn't intended to hold you to any of your predictions, but then again, maybe we can reconvene at the 2025 SSP and we'll go down the list and let's let's see where things ended up. I do agree that it was kind of I threw you a curveball. There's no real answer to it, but I thought you were the right kind of minds to get thinking about it. So the third prepared question I had for them, and then I'd love to open it up to your questions if you have some, was what should publishers know about the researchers at your university? Is there something that publishers can do to support their success that you'd like to bring up? Yeah.
So what you need to know about our researchers. Our researchers, as I mentioned before, are increasingly cross-disciplinary. Publishers, you need to fix the peer review process because as we're more and more cross-disciplinary, it's not okay to send those articles out to reviewers who don't have sufficient background because you've got your list of reviewers who are very focused on your discipline. So that's got to get fixed. The other thing is our researchers are global. Again, huge emphasis in all of our universities is global. And in the world we live in, the digital world, it's easy to collaborate with somebody halfway around the world. So publishers, along with that, you have to accommodate that. Issues such as language, copyright issues, huge. Especially as we get into data sets, what can be copyrighted in one country and what can't be copyrighted in another country, you need to grapple with that. You can't push that problem off to everybody else if you're actually going to publish it. Compliance issues, all of these, when they're complicated when you're in one country. When you open that up to a global world, it's significant and it impacts what you can do in the publication. So that's an area you need to pay attention to. As Paul mentioned, faculty are demanding. So if you can't publish their research the way they need to communicate it, they're going to find somebody else to communicate it. Also, they're demanding in the sense that if we as libraries, as universities, do not subscribe to the journal that they want, they know how to get it. Maybe their grad students don't. Maybe you can, as a publisher, you think that you've got the university, the library over a barrel because they, those faculty really need it. They know how to get it. They've got their connections. If they want it, they can get it. So you might scream as a publisher, it's happening, and that's going to continue to happen. And the more affordable the journals are, then we can end that problem. The other thing you need to know is that there are already efforts underway, successful efforts to recognize alternative approaches for promotion and tenure, alternative means of publication that take us into the more interactive and digital library realm that are recognized as valid scholarship. Publishers understand this is happening. The best thing you can do, rather than building your partnerships one-on-one with your individual faculty, is get out there to the institutions and build your partnerships with the institutions. You need to know what's going on because this landscape is changed. And while you're focused on a few faculty members and building those tight relationships, they may defend you, but there's a huge groundswell underway out there of faculty researchers, especially the graduate students, who do see that there are alternative approaches. So they do not feel stuck at this point, and it would behoove you to become a partner with the university, not just the individual researchers.
Okay. Thanks for those points. Paul?
So, yeah, I don't think faculty at Michigan are deeply different from faculty elsewhere. And I would agree with Geneva's point about cross-disciplinary work partly. So there's a lot of cross-disciplinary work. It's extremely important. I actually don't think it's up to publishers to figure out how to vet that work well. I think there are the publishers can maybe help develop editorial boards for existing journals that are open to the work. Publishers may even want to invent new fields through journals, which actually is a process that's been going on throughout my academic career. I grew up doing something called urban economics at the same time that Academic Press, remember Academic Press, invented a journal called the Journal of Urban Economics. And suddenly, people who were doing the kind of thing I was doing had a place to go with it. Similarly, the Journal of Public Economics, which continues to thrive. There was, even before the digital revolution, really a remarkable set of moves made by scholarly publishers in the journal fields to help work with faculty to really invent new fields of publication. So I think this really is a symbiotic exercise, and that the universities should be very much involved with it. Now, we have to be then good at constructing the right peers to do peer review around interdisciplinary work, not so trivial, but actually not unnatural to the way in which academic research goes on when it's at its best. One point that I want to toss in that some faculty care about are what are being called non-expressive uses of copyrighted work. So data mining, search, things like the Ngram setup, lots of computational linguistics, things that use copyrighted material, but they actually don't use the expression that is part of the requirement of copyright. They're just using buckets of words to analyze. It would be good if publishers thought, we don't care about that. That's not a threat to us. We would care a lot if you were taking our article, reprinting it and sending it someplace for free. We get that. I might approve of that in some cases too, but that's a very different thing than the non-expressive uses. And allowing those non-expressive uses and indeed embracing them as a field of scholarship or supporting scholarship in its own, I think is really quite important. The general thing that publishers should do, of course, is make it easy for researchers to use their own work and others' work, both expressive and non-expressive. And really that's the whole business, right? We want to make it easy for researchers to find and make sense of the scholarly record as they develop the scholarship of the future. And that's an overarching mission of the university, and I think that's an overarching mission of scholarly publication. And indeed, one of the things that commercial journals, high-end journals generally provide is indeed very high-quality finding aids, searching tools, et cetera. It's frustrating to those of us who are trying to do it on the cheap that, guess what? Doing it somewhat more expensively actually provides things of continuing value. I'd like to find an intermediate status where, yes, indeed, we make it really easy for faculty and students to find and use each other's work. And part of really easy is not too expensive.
One of the things, probably foremost, that would be good for publishers and presses to understand about our university is that, as Geneva and Paul said, we are more and more into cross-disciplinary work. KU is a large public international research university, a member of the AU, so it is fundamental to our mission to support research and make things available for faculty and for others around the world to use that scholarship and to interact with one another. And publishers can help by making their policies, first of all, clear and offering reasonable publication charges, friendly author agreements, and access to content for data mining and search, and helping their authors comply with the federal public access requirements that are now going into effect. We at the university provide at KU ScholarWorks a variety of templates to help make things easier for faculty, such as how to check the Sherpa database of publisher policies regarding sharing the work, or how to add statements or addenda to publishing agreements to protect your rights so that you can post your own work on your website, or letters to request permission to do so, and other resources to help authors understand open access publishing and to help them identify friendly venues where they can publish and make their work available. Because to faculty, that's everything. They want their work accessed so that it can contribute to, the broadening of knowledge, and that's really the huge opportunity we have overall in scholarly publishing. When you look across the world in disadvantaged populations, this is perhaps the biggest democratization force there is to make knowledge and information available so that people can access it and improve themselves as a result. We also are cognizant that open access and publisher aims are not at odds, and we must work together to have a workable, sustainable system. Obviously, our researchers want the widest access to published work, but we also have to acknowledge many faculty are involved in scholarly societies, and they're caught in that world from both sides, wanting to support those societies, but also make publication freely available. So things are migrating in that direction, but it really is going to take a lot more work and perhaps some leadership, as Geneva said, and new models to ultimately catch on.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. So I think that last section, we definitely had some things to think about, and I want to take a moment. I've got some other topics and things I've been writing down, but I'd love to take a moment to ask if anyone has a question or a comment, even maybe a sort of perspective that you'd like to offer in response. Yeah, please.
So my name is Mark Johnson. I'm with the Public Library Science Classes in San Francisco, and a University of Kansas graduate, 1989.
All right, chalk, Jay. Yeah.
So my question for you all is about the money, and you all kind of emphasized
Paul, you should take that first.
Okay.
That's your field.
So, yeah, people always think that economists actually understand about money, but that's okay. So the classic answer, however, which is very much an economist's answer, is it depends. It's very different by field, right? So there are fields in which the mechanism is almost certainly going to be prepay, some kind of, whether those are authors' charges or paid by institutions, but definitely the science model of open access, which is you pay the publisher in order to either make the article open access or, I think much more economically, as PLOS much more typically does, you pay the publisher in order to make the journal open access. Meanwhile, back in the humanities, you might get to that kind of model in the humanities, but there are many fields in which journals are done very differently. There are many fields in which there are books in which the tradition of paying through the library, at least for the time being, is likely to be important. Especially true in that, half of what we buy at the University of Michigan is not published in North America. There are many countries in which these alternative ways of organizing things simply isn't going to work. In fact, 90,000 volumes a year of stuff we buy that, I kid you not, on paper, and we actually ship it and put it in a library and stuff like that. So one thing that is true, however, as we think about making things more open, there's enough money in the system now to do what the system does now, right? It all gets paid for by somebody. In the fields that we're talking about, almost all but a tiny bit of it is actually paid for by universities, research institutes, and their ilk. And so you could flip how things get paid for. There's enough money to produce what gets produced at the quality that it gets produced and to distribute it already. And indeed, there's some rather handsome profits in some parts of the sector that might be trimmed a little bit, and you could do even more.
Does anybody else want to talk about that? Otherwise, we have Jeff.
That's one of the challenges. Like Paul said, there is money in the system, but incrementally, we're working on, for example, this University Press of Kansas, which is a statewide press that we contribute a few $100,000 from the university each year, as do other universities in the state. But also we're looking at more and more subvention models, which in balance should even out and shift costs so that would reduce, therefore, the losses from the press, and we won't have to provide as much funds. But in the interim, we just see cost increases. So we've got to get over that initial hurdle to get to the point where we can redistribute the model to be more sustainable. And that's part of the challenge, just trying to understand how all these different parts interact, because there is no one-size-fits-all model.
And I'm just going to say on that it is really a question at this point, if we're looking at the current model of you're talking about shuffling around. So if you take the perspective that it is the university with the money, library or research, it's the university's pot of money that they have, whether it's through subventions. But we were talking right before the session started. I have a perspective that we really need to change the model. If we could get enough universities to agree that they're going to fully fund presses and agree that those take priority in recognition in the promotion and tenure process, you can change the landscape. Because it's core to our business. This is what we do as a university. We create knowledge, we disseminate knowledge, we produce knowledge, we share our knowledge with students. That's the business we're in. It's all about knowledge. And it fundamentally, in any other business, you wouldn't outsource that kind of activity. But that's exactly what we've done. And now we're trying, trying to grapple with how do we rein it in without getting back to that foundational question of what business are we in and where do we make our investments. So from my perspective, we really ought to be investing in a university press, recognizing it's not cheap to do that. But if we do it at enough of a scale across research universities, it can change.
I think I saw this one. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, Lois Smith from the Human Factors of Ergonomics Society. You were talking about promotion and tenure, and you said something about alternative methods, being recognized by younger people, and yet it's all still bound up in the publication world. Are there any alternatives to promotion and tenure that don't involve publishing, and are those going to present any kind of challenge to the scholarly publishing field?
I'll start with it. They involve publishing. It's what you recognize as a publication that's starting to change. So I think, one of the earliest projects out there was the Valley of the Shadows, project that was done at University of Virginia, and some of the, the scholarly value of that is great. It did not fit into a traditional publication, so that, there was a struggle there of how do you count that? And Ed Ayers was very successful in, fighting to say, this is scholarship, it's valid scholarship. But it's not in the typical, journal or book that you pick up. And those are the kinds of things where scholarship can be produced online, and we don't have a clean wrapper for it right now. We don't have what we're used to thinking of as a publication, but it is a publication. So I'm not saying that publication doesn't matter anymore. Publication is critical. Peer review, as Paul pointed out, it's critical. But how that's done is changing.
What she said.
Well, maybe I'll piggyback on that very briefly, because you talked a lot about making data available, especially for remining and reuse and some reanalysis. And I know that in a lot of people's minds is the issue of reproducibility of work. And I'm leaning a little more toward the sciences. This is my background. Do you think that credit for reproducing things, is that on the horizon? Or is that something that will always sort of live outside?
That's an interesting question, because it takes considerable effort to do that sort of thing, and what latitude, how is that going to be recognized by departments? Is a contribution that is not necessarily the creation of the knowledge, but the mentoring of it or the development of it, is that going to be recognized equally or to some significant extent?
Right.
And ultimately it comes down to some mark of quality, regardless of the venue or the type of publication or the way that it's disseminated. You have to have some certifiable mark of quality on it to be recognized and then be used in promotion and tenure. So whether it's one of the alt metrics or not, it's that correspondence to peer review that's needed.
So just on the question of replicability, which is one of my favorites. So I would not advise any young scholar go into the business of taking published work and seeing if you can replicate the results. However, I would advise anybody teaching a graduate course in an empirical field to say to his students or her students, here, pick a paper that you're interested in and go try to replicate it. And often things won't be exactly as claimed. Sometimes things will be quite not as claimed. Then you have a very interesting publishable paper. And indeed, there's been quite an interesting case recently that's gotten a lot of publicity. And that doesn't get done unless the data are findable and open. So I think replicability is always important, but it happens along the way. You need the result, you need it to work, and if it doesn't work, that's extremely interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That was an interesting perspective. Wow, we got so many. You want to go ahead, sir?
Just a first quick comment on the economics. I think the statistic I heard is about 75% of the content, scholarly content, is produced by about 25% of the consumers. In other words, the Harvards, MITs, question is more on, as hard as possible, but it's not just simply shifting the model, we're also shifting who's paying. My question is more on the distributed institutional repositories that you and other governments around the world and the state governments are requiring, and how you find the efficiencies in that, since as you all mentioned, research is global, it's multi-author, it's multi-institutional, it's multi-funding agencies, so that for any one paper there might be 12 or 15 copies of that paper in all the repositories. And have you all thought about the efficiencies? Inefficiencies,
Yeah.
So I'm going to let my colleagues think about that and go back to your first point, the 2575, and the numbers, something like that. But the other fact is that the big publishers all engage in price discrimination, which works the other way. So MIT and Michigan and Kansas pay a lot more for journals than Kansas State and Western Michigan do. That's actually not inappropriate, that kind of price discrimination. It's a sensible way to organize things, but the difference is therefore not as large as it might first appear, in that it's the big research institutions pay much more for the big deal journal bundles than smaller institutions do. In fact, I'd love to, now that you've brought that up, there's a paper to do on just that topic and figure out how closely those things track, since we have some information about those price differences.
Yeah, you had a PNAS paper, correct?
Yeah,
That-
the
looked at
PNAS
that.
paper could be extended in that way.
Yeah.
I'll talk to my colleagues about it.
Great. This is good. Collaboration, research, creation. Does somebody else want to talk a little bit more about the, multiple copies? I mean, this is something that already exists as an issue, and tracking, especially the use of these other copies, and how do you, if you're trying to look at the impact of a given paper, especially, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's the same paper, you're talking about it's an identical paper published in multiple places.
I'm saying that institutional and funding agency repository requirements are that those copies get, there's a paper that's co-authored by multiple institutions,
Right.
multiple funding agencies. Each funding agency is requiring a copy of that paper, each institution is requiring a copy of that paper.
I personally don't see a problem with having it out there in a lot of places to find.
Problem with that, I'm talking except for the economic problem. Cost per paper.
Well, in any feasible system, you're going to have a lot of redundancy for, frankly, purposes of access as well as reliability. And if you can link them all together in the sense that you want to collect statistics on use of papers and have common IDs so that even if they're accessed at 20 different places, you can collect the overall statistics on usage, that would be an important thing to do. But you're going to, by nature, have redundancy for desired purposes.
Well, and maybe that was part of the impetus behind the idea of linking institutional repositories. Would it be that if you're attempting to put something up, it can say, well, someone's already put this paper up, it's already available in our system, then you don't end up with 6 different copies at all those institutions. I think in most cases they just want a copy to be available somewhere. If they knew that that was the case, you may not need to worry about storing. I mean, you could go that direction. I mean,
Well, and there are different motivations for having multiple copies. There's preservation as one motivation. The other is for each institution to know that they have the scholarship of their own institution, and there are a number of things they can do with that. Jeff mentioned the expert finder system that more and more universities are doing. So there are different motivations for an institution to keep that. But right, if there are shared, if the DOI is in the metadata, if the ORCID IDs are there, it's going to be a lot easier to pull those all together, and there are services right now that do that.
okay, you got one, and then we'll do yours. Sorry.
You said that data analytics are very important to increase usability. A journal editor in a
I don't think, Jeff may disagree, I doubt that a provost would ever put anything that bright line that would have to then cover dozens of disciplines, because there'd be some place in which that would be a train wreck. But the notion that good scholarly practice requires depositing the data with the paper is certainly one that can be encouraged as part of the campus environment across fields where it is appropriate. I think that is going on. I think we're going to see more of it, and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and that would generally happen at the grassroots level because of individual department cultures, and would vary from department to department.
I don't think it's the provost or even the departments that are going to lead in that direction. It's the funders. And as soon as the funders mandate it, it's a done deal.
Sorry, yes, you've had a question for a while. Please go ahead, and then we'll.
I'm Peach Liu. I work at Wiley. I'm also a GW alum. That's very recent. But I work with scholarly associations that manage journals that are owned by this association. And so we just finished our fundraising cycle. And so I always have really, really worried society members. And I kind of, I work for Wiley. We have a big deal. But I'm always telling my clients library budgets are being slashed year on year. But don't worry, because your journal is important enough. It's part of the tenure track. I mean, it's much more than you want to telling them that. But I'm just wondering if I'm hearing you guys talk about there are different modes of publication now. I kind of worry that I'm telling my clients the wrong thing, and I wonder what, as librarians who are respectful that a lot of these folks who sit in the scholarly association are, in your universities, is how do we contact them? How do we tell them that it's, it's this whole big process, and I'm just kind of wondering, there's so many moving pieces, but how do we support those associations? Because as a publisher, I want to support them. I'm sure the universities want to support them. So I'm wondering if that comes into play at all.
So I guess you may, it depends. You might be leading your publishers astray. It depends. I mean, because really, I just got handed a 5% budget cut for FY16. We get cut, and we have, what we do, I tell my librarians, you got to look at the usage. Are people using those articles? Are there journals that we don't subscribe to where we're getting them through interlibrary loan and we're paying big fees, and it'd be better if we do subscribe? We're doing a ground zero every year, and if it's a journal that is really not getting used, from my perspective, it's eligible for the chopping block because the demand is huge, and what we can, and inflation keeps going up at exorbitant amounts, far beyond the cost of living anywhere else on the planet. So we have to cut somewhere, and it's not necessarily going to be the most expensive journal. If there are several, somewhere in that mid-range or even on the low range, if they're not being used, it's up for consideration of chopping. So it really is, I think, it's back to getting to know your university, and not just the library and not just individual faculty, but really, find a way to understand what's going on. What's the research that's going on at that university, and where's the focus? What are the priorities of the university? Where are they? What are they supporting in research over other areas?
Okay.
I think if I were designing a system to support scholarly societies, it would probably not be the one we have. And that doesn't mean that the one we have doesn't have life in it, at least for a while. But more and more, again, going back to the logic that I adduced at the beginning, it's really easy to copy and distribute things. It's going to be, I think, increasingly hard for many of the scholarly societies to make their living selling their journals. And I think that's something for the publishers of those journals to be thinking about, and the members of those societies, and candidly, the universities themselves might at some point be in a position to say, gee, is there a way that we can support this part of the enterprise differently than buying things through the library? I think that's one of the things that might change in the next 10 or 15 years.
All right, thank you. I saw another hand right there, and then we'll move over this way. So, yeah, please.
Speak up a little bit.
Sorry, is the time spent?
The time spent reviewing referees, is that being factored into those measures?
Okay. So credit for service as a peer reviewer for the researcher. Is that something you guys are seeing in tenure consideration at all?
It's recognized as an important service, but realistically, it's not going to substitute for research contributions. So it's something that adds to a promotion portfolio, but it's not going to be a substitution.
Yeah, and I think the time that reviewers are spending on these alternatives, it's really not about time. I mean, they can list it as reviewed, but it sort of then gets flattened. You know, reviewed, 5 journal articles, reviewed this, digital scholarship site. It's a review.
It is in the departments that I'm in, which are 3, it's absolutely in the annual review process for a faculty member's activity. And so a faculty member who's writing many referee reports for high-quality journals, that counts as you think about how well that faculty member is doing, and it may show up a little bit in pay. It's hard to believe it's going to be the dividing line between getting tenure or not, but it is certainly part of an academic career that is appreciated, I think, at various places in the academic career.
Okay, yeah, we'll just move this way. So would you like to go ahead, sir? And then we'll here and then here. Yeah.
Something I've heard from the panel that interactivity and data are going to be really important in the future. I also heard, I think, Geneva and others mentioned that paper is likely to still play an important role in that 10 to 15 year time frame. And certainly, I hear you continue to invest in things like digital repositories. How do you see the breakdown and the potential conflict between those two? More interactivity, more specialization, and apps and things have to be tied to code running, more paper and depositing, though less interactivity. Do you see a tipping point? Do you see some actor helping to drive that change?
From my perspective, I think it's going to be a total blend. It's what you can now do to enhance these print publications that are primarily text now and some static images. Now you're able to really enrich that explanation of your findings. So especially for many scientists and then also people publishing in a language that's not their native language. It's a challenge when you've gone through some complex process to really communicate exactly what your findings are and how significant they are. A visualization driven by the data around it can convey so much information that makes a lot more sense of the text when you have that as a reference point. It also provides a means for testing the validity of the research that's been done. So I don't see it as a tipping point. I just think our publications are becoming richer. They're not just all these interactive objects. I think there's definitely still text there, but it becomes much more meaningful and more accessible to a wider audience of users.
So here I want to agree completely that, and go back to the root of the word publication, which is making public. There's lots of ways to make results public, and And what I expect should happen in the digital world, as we have more and more of those ways available to scholars and people working with scholars, is we'll see lots of ways being used, and you know, with any luck, the tool will fit the task well, and so it's not a tipping point, it's going to be a portfolio, and I think that's good news.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that you have an enhanced publication. It has a home in an institutional repository, just the same as the current, you know, PDF copy does, so that they could sort of work together. In that.
Now, that's a technical problem for the repository,
Right.
and you may want to coordinate on that across them, because building lots of platforms for that is going to be really expensive.
That goes back to.
I think, though,
to
as
your
you go
point.
through decades, there will be an evolution to more electronic, just because of the people that are involved and new generations coming in who grew up in that medium.
Okay, we had a question up front, and then in the back. Go
Scott's
ahead.
had a question forever.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, please go ahead first, and then we'll do yours for sure.
October items. Two observations I had on our general topic here. One is that the very largest publishers, you know, the Elsevier, Springer, et cetera, have been making an investment in assessment, functionality, community support. They haven't given up on publications, but they're expanding their portfolios. They're buying startups. They're investing in these, you know, smaller sort of researcher-founded companies. And where that's going to lead the smaller society publishers, I don't know. You know, you don't really I don't make that much of a distinction now. You know, I talk about, I work mostly with nonprofit publishers, including societies. Well, all of Blackwell was societies, half of Elsevier. So that line between when are you an independent publisher and you publish with somebody else, what does that mean to consumers, to the libraries who are buying this stuff? So there's a real trend there where I feel like they're kind of hedging their bets. Like if libraries ever get to the point of canceling big deals about all these other things to charge money for. So that's one observation. The second observation that we have to talk about today is the Open Educational Resources Initiative, which is more on the textbook and course adoption side. But it's really coming from the consumer side of the market, the students. Just, you know, if you look at the cost, you know, an introductory Spanish textbook charging $300 a student, being required for a course times 1,000 students a semester. So that's another huge development coming up, where any publisher who works in the courseware, text, course adoption areas, that is really growing with alternative open access content. So those are two observations for you to respond to.
I know the textbooks, I think, is something you've mentioned, right?
Yeah, that's where those publishers are going, because they see that as what the textbooks of the future will be. They will be the actual online content. And it's up to the universities who create that content to take charge of that. And I think that's a major aspect on costs for students. And I'd like to see universities be much more involved.
When I was at Rice, I was very involved in the Connections project and getting it launched and started, and now it's moved into OpenStax, which is doing, you know, the open textbooks. And one of the first things they did is one of the supporters of that program just bought the rights to a statistics book, the Intro to Statistics book that all of the most colleges were using, and made it openly available. And that's, you know, one way to do it is just go, you know, just outright buy the rights to some of the core textbooks that are out there and just make it openly available. But you need the right benefactor to go and do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get to your question. Yeah, definitely. And
Scott Jeff from the University of Oregon. You've all alluded
completely non-hypothetical. I want to pose the question to you. What would you find to be a compelling argument, given the financial realities, that would persuade you that it is important to spend some millions of dollars on addressing this particular problem?
If the funders provided mandates that had teeth, avoiding those teeth would be worth several millions of dollars.
And I think the costs are not as severe because our infrastructure is there that we can build upon. So it's not creating an entire new infrastructure. We're making use of all of our IT capabilities. I think it's an important service for universities to provide, and it's just part of our mission.
I also think, the reality is that it does take a campus to make this happen. And when you've got the campus telling the provost, it's all of these piece parts, you've got a much more compelling story of it's not just the library trying to do all of this. It's not IT trying to do all of this. It's a collaboration across the campus, which really helps to motivate making that infrastructure investment, knowing that everyone is working together on this, and it makes a difference in research. It's a competitive advantage to be able to do that.
Okay, well, I want to be mindful of the time. We're right at 3:30, so I really appreciate all of your questions, and thank you, guys, for coming. I'd like to really thank our panelists.